ever feel like your brain is just checked out? You're staring at your screen, you're walking into a room, and you're not really sure kind of why you're there. That's brain fog. And I think we can all relate to that. What maybe we don't think about is that nutrition can actually play a big role in that. And so do some of our other lifestyle factors like sleep and stress and hydration. And all of this is interconnected. So, what are we going to do about it? And that's kind of what we're talking about today. We know that our brain makes up only about 2% of our body weight, but it's burning about 20% of our daily energy. This means this is a big part of our body that we need to take care of, and it has a big impact on clarity and focus. So, I'm so excited today to be joined by Matthew and Mike to really dive into what is brain fog, what can we do about it, as well as, yeah, how this is all connected. So we are going to jump right in with both Mike and Matthew. And I think actually what we need to do first is even define brain fog. I feel like we can all be like, "Hey, we've been there. We know what it maybe feels like, but do we actually know how to define it?" So, Mike, how do we define this?
Typically, a lot of people will define brain fog as like this feeling of mental sluggishness, like your thoughts are moving through mud or thick fog. A lot of people experience difficulty with focus, memory, and clear thinking. But it's not just feeling tired, or it's not only just feeling tired. It's like a slowdown of your brain where mental tasks feel harder and just slower to do.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I think we can relate to that, and I think it shows up, in different times. For myself, it shows up in parenthood and other things. So that's a good way of putting kind of like a sluggishness, just not being able to focus. So with everybody being dietitians here today, what are kind of common things that we see with brain fog? Like, what are the reasons for it?
One of the things that I can relate to right now is lack of sleep. I have a little one, he's still not sleeping through the night altogether. And what that can do is really disrupts the brain's cleaning process. Um, you know, as we go throughout the day, our brain is creating waste products from all the metabolic reactions that are happening. And these products build up. And at the end of the day, when we go to sleep, typically that's when our brain can clear out these different substances and help you start the next morning with a fresh brain. So, by having multiple interruptions in your sleep, not enough sleep, or poor quality of sleep, those are all things that can interrupt the brain's cleaning process. And then we don't start the next day with a clean slate or a clean brain, so to speak. And that can really kind of set us back and set us up for experiencing brain fog that day.
Matthew, any other common things that you've seen in your practice that you can think of?
Yes, other factors that are more related to nutrition that we'll talk about in more detail include things like dehydration, where even mild dehydration can impact things like how blood flows to our brain and through our bodies and make it harder for us to remember things, make it harder for us to pay attention to things. So that's one that can sometimes be overlooked. It sounds very simple, but it also is something that can be a struggle for a lot of people. Another one is going to be nutritional deficiencies, and we'll get into how each of these things can play a role. But some of the main ones are going to include things like how much B12 we're having, folate, omega 3s, iron, as well as some of the blood or lab values for some of these numbers.
Okay, awesome. Anything else that we're missing out of this? Any other reasons why brain fog could be happening for some people?
Couple of things that other people kind of notice is that chronic diseases can often play a role in brain fog. So, multiple or long term hypoglycemic events and diabetes, stress and time constraints are also contributing to other causes like lack of sleep. And chronic stress is also a huge driver of inflammation. And we know that chronic inflammation, is really bad for the body. And it turns out it's also really bad for the brain. Some of the other things that we can talk about as well is some medications can have an effect on that. A lot of them will tell you, you may have these side effects, and also some medical treatments. Like one of the things that has been on my mind lately, and talking about with some of the other dietitians at work is chemotherapy, and a lot of people that talk about chemo brain and how that's affecting their day to day life. So stay tuned for more on that later, though.
Other chronic conditions that can play a role are going to be things like some autoimmune diseases, some thyroid issues, as well as things that can happen following viruses. So things like long COVID. things where we had some kind of severe reaction to a virus or other condition. And we're in the recovery process where that can cause some of those brain fog issues, either in the short term or for some people in the long term for things like long COVID.
And I think it's really interesting that there's like you guys came up with a lot of lists because we think about brain fog as just something, we just have it, right? But then we don't really think that it could be a little bit more than that. It could be related to a lot of things. I don't think, we're usually thinking about the brain always as something that we need to kind of be taken care of or think about the impact of it to the brain. But we also know, and I think this is important for listeners, is there potentially could be a difference also, though, between brain fog and maybe something more serious. So if people are experiencing brain fog, how do we what can we tell them of what to do? Or what if it is something a little bit more that needs to be checked out? What could be some differences there?
Yeah, some important things to consider if we're experiencing these kinds of symptoms, and a sign that maybe we would want to follow up with our doctor to see if it is something more serious potentially, is if the brain fog or the cognitive impacts we're having are severe, they are persistent, or in general, it's having a very significant impact on our day-to-day life. So is it making just activities of daily life much harder? Is it harder for you to get through the workday? Is it harder for you to get through other tasks that before maybe weren't an issue? Are you experiencing things like very severe fatigue, where you know what being tired or very tired is like for yourself, but is it well beyond that? Are we experiencing other symptoms related to maybe severe, significant changes in weight that are not explained by some other issue, or they are unintentional and we're losing a lot of weight? Are we experiencing some kind of other neurological symptoms? So this could be things like numbness or tingling in parts of the body. For some people, it's vision changes. For some people, it's changes like this that happen either maybe it's a little more slow, or it's very rapid in how it happens. Another one is going to be just very clear signs in changes in cognitive function. So again, this relates to some of those things like, yeah, changes in how easy it is for us to do basic tasks, things that were basic tasks before, or activities of daily life, or even more, maybe things that are a little more cognitively demanding. Even those are getting more difficult. Those are signs where we may want to ensure that we're being assessed for more serious medical issues. And we would also want to consider, even in the context of, let's say, we do have a diagnosed condition that is known to cause cognitive or neurological impacts, is that changing significantly over time? Are these symptoms, yeah, they existed before, now they're getting worse, or are these brand new symptoms? Do these brand new symptoms coincide with changes to maybe a new medication or something like that, where maybe we would expect some degree of symptoms? We still want to check in with our doctor, let them know how it's impacting us, knowing if what we're experiencing is within what would normally be expected with our medical treatment. And even if that is the case and it is still having a significant impact on you, are there alternatives that you can explore for treating the medical condition at hand?
I also think, I work with lots of clients with chronic disease, and sometimes they don't really know or don't really can't see it, or we don't usually just stop and reflect on, I wonder how my brain is functioning. Like that just doesn't seem to be kind of our norm, right? We're running on autopilot, or maybe we've actually developed skills around adapting or not. So I think even, if you're noticing or some change, or a partner or a friend or whatever is noticing things too that maybe are a little bit off or a little bit different, I think that's definitely important. I'm also a really big advocate of don't just think that it's normally how it's supposed to be, too. I think we run that a little bit sometimes with health conditions or not knowing, right? It's not a big deal. I don't need to go get it checked out. And we've talked about that at other podcasts of, you know, the mindset is, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is really important to be staying on top of those pieces too. So that's just my little push in there too. But let's go into this. I mean, we're dietitians, we want to talk about nutrition. People are probably Googling if they've got brain fog, they're like, I wonder what, my diet's gonna, what can I do? What can I take? What can I eat for brain health? But what, and we'll start with maybe Mike, what nutrients or deficiencies are most linked to brain health? I mean, that actually have evidence behind them too. That's a big piece.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Some of the most important ones right off the top are some B vitamins, especially B12 and folate. They're both essential for neurological function and energy production, and they also aid in red blood cell formation. Um, B12 most commonly found in animal products and stuff like that, but there's also some great routes for supplementation, especially for those that are vegan or vegetarian. So a lot of times you'll see that in nutritional yeast or nooch, as I've heard it called by some vegetarian friends. So that can be a good way to kind of make sure you're getting your B12 if you're vegan or vegetarian. Another essential nutrient is iron. It's crucial for oxygen transport to the brain. So I think we can all agree with no oxygen or low oxygen to the brain, that's going to be really bad. So deficiency in iron can lead to anemia, and this reduces can result sorry in reduced cognitive function, and also contribute to that brain fog that we've been talking about. Vitamin D is another one that's often overlooked when you think about brain health, but it's very important, and it's also super important mood regulation, and it's an anti-inflammatory. So again, we kind of hit on inflammation, and all those molecules that are reducing inflammation is going to be good for our brain. While we always preach a whole food diet, one of the emerging research going on is showing that creatine is can be a really effective supplement for cognition and mental focus and brain energy. So emerging research is showing that it has an effect beyond just building muscles, and it has a positive impact on mental focus and memory. And some of the research is showing that women in the 50 plus demographic are showing the greatest improvements in the people that they've tested for creatine supplementation. So it can be certainly very effective. Turns out that we may need slightly larger doses than the 5 grams because it has a harder time passing that blood-brain barrier. So only a little bit at a time can get through there. But continued supplementation with creatine is showing positive impact on cognition, memory, and brain energy. So that's super important, exciting as another avenue that we can kind of help fight brain fog. And for all things creatine, I know that you Playful of Insights, we just did an episode on this, just the last episode. So if you guys have any deeper questions or more questions about creatine, definitely check that out because it is definitely packed full of information there.
I'm kind of curious, Mike, as we go on this piece of the deficiency piece. Like, how do people know that they're deficient in these things? Should everybody just, take a supplement to be like, I'm doing this for my brain health? Like, what do you say to that based on those kind of three things you talked about?
Yeah, so one of the good things to know is like take a look at your diet. Are you eating a balanced diet? Half of our plate should be vegetables and fruit. With a quarter of our plate being protein foods and another quarter of our plate being carbohydrates, preferably from whole grain sources, right? So in that plate mixture rather, you're going to see with the foods and vegetables, you're going to see a lot of anti-inflammatory compounds in there that are really going to help, fight inflammation. You're going to see a lot of antioxidants in there that are super helpful for that as well. Making sure we get our protein foods from whole sources, not necessarily just saying I'm going to go have a protein shake and that's going to be my protein source for the day. By having whole foods, we can make sure we get a broad spectrum of nutrients because that's what comes from eating whole foods. Whereas if you're just targeting for protein supplementation, you're really going to be missing out on a lot of other things that come from eating a balanced diet.
So if we think about the whole foods and we think about those pieces that we should include, what about, are there foods that we shouldn't include or that could trigger brain fog? So if we're looking kind of both there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Some of the things that we kind of talk about as dietitians, and the message is kind of getting out there more and more is that we try and avoid some highly processed foods and sugary drinks. I mean, it's been no surprise for a long time. People have been arguing against sugary drinks, but I think more and more now, more research is showing that highly processed foods also have a pro-inflammatory role in the body, and they're having some long-term detrimental effects on our performance, and this is also going to trickle down to our brain. So these things can often lack in nutrients. Highly processed foods, they can be highly palatable, they can be high in fat and sugar, high in salt, which tastes really good, but in the end kind of leave us full of energy because they're highly calorie dense, but they're also lacking in nutrients. So while we might feel full and satiated, doesn't necessarily mean we're getting a lot of the nutrients that we kind of expect to see and that we do get when we eat a broad diet of whole foods. Um, and a lot of times these things too, like they lead to blood sugar imbalances. So talking about riding that blood sugar roller coaster, you have a sugary drink, the brain gets a real dose of quick energy, and you kind of get that boost real quick. But then, as we talked about a little bit earlier, talking about those hypoglycemic events, as things go up, things must come down. So, and that's kind of when people can experience these sugar crashes and stuff like that. And you can kind of really feel that fog hitting you and rolling over, usually pretty quick. So it's super important to, you know, practice eating whole foods because it can help us balance out that blood sugar load throughout the day and get a more even energy level to our body and brain, as opposed to, getting those spikes and crashes that tend to come when we have, high sugary drinks or even really sweet foods.
Okay. So we've talked about the nutrition components, but we also know that there's much more to that. And we talked about on other podcasts of like everything seems to be connected. So then we're thinking about the brain. There's got to be more than just nutrition that has an impact on brain. So Matthew, do you want to start?
So some of the lifestyle factors that we can expand on are going to be things like things that we have heard in other contexts are going to be good for our health, and we want to consider why those things play a role specifically here when it comes to brain health. So sleep is one of them that we touched on earlier, where sleep is where our body does essentially its housekeeping. As Mike described earlier, brain is the time for or sleep is the time for our brains to clear out some of that is an adenosine that is going to contribute to our tiredness, feel more alert when we wake up, have better memory, have better just overall cognitive ability. So sleep is a really big one. Something else to consider with sleep is not just sleep quantity, but also things that impact sleep quality. So it's not just we want to be like in our bed for as many hours as possible. We want as many high quality hours as possible. And if sleep is an area where we struggle currently, it can be helpful to make changes that are a little more gradual. So we're not going for like that 8 hours right away. Sometimes mathematically that's also just not going to work, but it is going just closer to that direction, trying to increase our sleep duration in total, but also just the frequency of that. So not waking up at like let's say 5 one day and 10 another and then trying to make it work, trying to find that middle ground that we can be as consistent with as possible. Whether it be maybe just this month we have a certain goal that we want to be consistent with, month we pick it up from there, and so on, aiming for improved sleep quality and quantity gradually in a way that makes sense. Other lifestyle factors we want to consider are going to be things like hydration, as mentioned earlier. So, water being just vital for our overall body's function and the brain cells in our body too it's going to be important to ensure that we're hydrated, not just for the other benefits that we know about related to things like our overall health, digestive health, just necessity for human life up to a certain amount. It's also an important factor for things like memory and concentration. Stress is going to be another big factor where we know that stress can interfere when it comes to sleep quality and sleep consistency. So, trying to address some of those factors relating to stress over time as well. Other things are going to include things like trying to be more physically active as best as we can. Again, not going for that all or nothing kind of thing where we want like perfect sleep, exercise all the time, getting some exact perfect workout routine, but just being more active. Even light activity is going to be something that helps with increasing flow to the brain, delivering oxygen and nutrients to our body, and increasing that again at a sustainable pace is going to be an important factor.
Like any other pieces that people need to think about when it comes to brain fog or what could be contributing to brain fog?
Yeah, absolutely. Hydration is a huge one. We kind of talked about that a little bit earlier, but that it's super important for brain cell function and electrical signaling. Dehydration impairs our concentration and our memory. So studies have shown even mild dehydration, which we would define as say 1 to 2% of body weight loss, can reduce your cognitive performance and it slows reaction times, it increases fatigue, and it decreases your alertness. So these things occur because dehydration decreases the blood volume to your brain, and that it limits oxygen that gets to your brain and it limits the nutrients that get to your brain. So all those things are necessary for us to have the energy to provide the brain with the nutrients it needs to keep doing the things that it does, keeping us sharp. So, what's super important is that, with this mild dehydration, if you get rehydrated, you can kind of reverse a lot of these things pretty quickly. So, making sure that you get your appropriate amount of water, like 2.5 liters a day. Drinking water is, it's going to go a long way to keeping sure that your brain is optimally hydrated. Another thing that we talk about is stress, releases cortisol. A lot of times stress is always seen as a bad thing, but that's not true. There's distress, which is we would typically call the bad stress, and there's eustress, that's EU stress, which can be good in the short term. It's kind of um, it's the adaptations that occur under, say, even when you're exercising. So when you're, exercising or you're lifting heavy weights, that's eustress on your body. It's giving you a short period of stress. Your body responds and adapts, and you come back stronger from it. But chronic stress releases cortisol, and over long term, this cortisol drives inflammation again, which can damage our brain cells and impairs our cognitive function over time. So really, kind of coming back a lot to inflammation and how that's really bad for us, our body, bad for our brain. One of the good things that can kind of help alleviate that, exercise increases blood flow to the brain, helps deliver more oxygen and nutrients, and it promotes the growth of new brain cells. So honestly, I think the research is more and more showing that one of the biggest movers of overall improvement in health is exercise across so many different domains, not just not just your brain health, it's also your emotional health, your mental health, right? Social health. So exercise is just a huge one that, we often overlook when we're trying to look for this silver pill or this silver bullet that'll really just be, the one thing that we need. And it turns out if there's anything that's a silver bullet, it might just be exercise, getting out, moving more. So, movement is medicine. That's just really something I think we should try and keep that in mind.
Yeah. And in these more lifestyle based types of strategies for addressing brain fog, I also think it is important that we talk about maybe some of the practical ways to try to implement some of these things because all of these are easier said than done. And they're all things that we know in different ways are good for our health. So, for some of these, what would you say are some practical strategies to get to that next step in improving these things?
Yeah, from a nutrition perspective, what are some of the main few easy things? Maybe a few easy wins for people. Fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines. They're rich in omega 3s, or like most specifically DHA, and they're great for brain structure and function. Um, Turns out though, these fish don't make their omega 3s on their own. They actually get their omega 3s from algae. So if you're looking for a supplementation source that's like animal free, there are now algae sources of EPA and DHA omega 3s, which is really good for us, and it's a little bit easier on the environment too. Another easy win is berries, blueberries, strawberries. These things have high in antioxidants, which is going to help fight inflammation, and they help protect your brain cells and support cognitive function. And berries have a lot of fiber, and they also help blunt that glycemic effect or the sugar effect. Because sure, berries are sweet, but the fiber and all the other nutrients as well help kind of make sure it's delivered in a more sustained period over a longer period of time, as opposed to a quick sugar spike from other foods like sugary drinks and stuff like that. Another thing that dietitians have been, preaching for years is leafy green vegetables, specifically stuff like spinach and kale. So, packed with vitamins and minerals and antioxidants, all again really good for our brain health. So, and vitamin K and folate as well in these leafy greens. So, those are three simple and easy ones. So, have yourself a salad, a nice green salad. Add some berries. Who doesn't like a salad with some berries? You know, um, and then try and get your fish in as well.
I think too, even Matthew, for your question is, like, how do we do this or implement? Because there's a lot of strategies, right? That all of a sudden come down, and how do we do this, and how do we even know? And sometimes I think we need to sometimes take us like a step back and go like, okay, what are the things I can do today? What's something I can do today to try to see if that has an impact? Because my worry is mostly probably from the brain capacity of like, if we're like, oh, let's try this and this and this, and then it's gonna be like, oh, like I don't even know which one is gonna help, or do I even see a change, or is it just too much of a brain overload when we're trying to, provide some clarity and focus. So I think for our listeners, it's important to go, yeah, like what out of any of these things, if you identify or take a moment and go, oh, like, yeah, like how is my sleep? Like, where am I at with that? Just do kind of like a self reflection kind of check in. How is my hydration? have I is that something I even need to work on? Or, am I moving or am I not moving? And see if that has an impact. And I think we forget that, yeah, don't go all in and stress the brain even more. That's not the purpose, is both you talked about, right? Like the chronic stress of it too. Sometimes lifestyle strategies cause stress amongst themselves. So kind of keeping it basic, focused. What's kind of one thing you can try for sure. And I love, Mike, that you even said, oh, like, the leafy greens. I would love to say that we would be able to have some revolutionary piece, but I mean, it does come down to those basics. Sometimes the vegetables, those fruits that we kind of forget about as not as exciting. So other pieces that might impact brain health too, like we're looking at alcohol or substance abuse, right? Even we talked about, Mike talked about like the connection with exercise, but we also know just connection, relationships surrounding yourselves, like that can go a long way in improving brain health, or having a system or people in place to go, hey, you know what, I think I actually really need some help to maybe take some of the offload off. And then, the nature component, we forget about just being nature, getting outside, nice, take a break. We're on screens all the time. That can also really also impact brain fog, where we just need to step away. Deep breathing or meditation can be a piece for that. But Mike, let's talk about these cycles that are on here, because I'm curious about them and how this is all connected with the brain fog and what our listeners should know about the different systems that are going on.
Yeah, Andrea, that's a really great question. I know we've kind of talked about a lot of different things here today: exercise, nutrition, sleep, inflammation. It's important to realize too that these factors are all interconnected. They're not isolated. It's not like you can just, do this one thing to fight this one other thing. They have a profound influence on each other. So, like, stress affects your sleep, which will impact your food choices, which impacts your blood sugar, and that can create a cycle. It can create a vicious cycle. How a poor habit in one area can make others worse. know? Conversely, though, it's not all bad news, because there are also virtuous cycles. So, where you say you improve your habit in one area, aka getting better sleep, and that can positively impact, areas like your energy. It impacts your food choices. It impacts your mood. So it's a virtuous cycle, and studies have shown this, that when people are tired or when they're hungry, they tend to make different kinds of decisions, poorer decisions. Um, there's a famous study looking at judges and sentences handed out, and they've found that sentences are more harsh right before lunchtime and stuff. Just as people are kind of getting to the end of their energy reserve, they're finding that judges are handing out stiffer sentences. And then when they kind of come back after lunch and they've had a little mental break and hopefully had some food, they're showing that sentences are actually lighter and more lenient than just before lunch. So if you're ever caught up with the court system, hopefully that never happens to any of our listeners, or any of our podcasting hosts here as well. Um, you know, just try and hope that you get to be seen right after lunch. So it's a quick life hack.
I think that is an important to note, that it is connected, right? And there is those kind of both positive and negative feedback loops that can happen depending on how it goes. I'm curious about, as we kind of wrap up for today, we think about kind of myths, I think, myths that are out there, or pieces around brain fog. And one of the myths out there is that it's just diet alone. Nothing else matters. So what do we say to those people? How do we bust that myth?
One common myth that is important to address is that diet alone is going to be the sole cause and then the sole solution when it comes to brain fog. And this is often used in the context of a lot of other health issues, where it's just this one thing is going to fix all your problems, or it's going to be the sole cause of your problems. Sometimes people don't even just say diet broadly. They'll even say, like, it's this one specific food that you need to stop eating or start eating. But we need to consider, one, that diet alone is not going to be the only factor. There are going to be a lot of things we already mentioned, like sleep, stress management, medications that you may be taking for other medical conditions, things like hydration. There are a lot of different factors that go into something this complex, and we need to consider all of them, both in evaluating if we, for example, need to seek medical attention for it, or when we do know what's wrong, how are we going to address it, knowing that all of those factors can play a role. We also want to consider that within diet, as I said, sometimes singular things are blamed for it, and there might be more than one overall diet change that could help us, but it can be helpful maybe to start with one thing just so that we have a narrower goal in mind and we have something better to start with, things like that. One more is that there's going to be a special supplement that's going to fix everything. And again, this happens in a lot of other areas where people will sell a supplement that's going to fix X problem. In the context of cognitive health, it's going to be like brain boosters or like focus force or some name with those combination of words that's going to be the one trick to fix all your issues. And with supplements, we need to consider like what the specific ingredients are in that thing. What dosages are they in? Do they even tell you? What is the evidence behind each of these ingredients? Is there some kind of approval process that they've gone through with this type of with this supplement that they're selling? Things like that. But for the most part, a supplement isn't going to there isn't like one brain supplement. If you're deficient in one of those particular vitamins or minerals that we mentioned can be deficiencies here, then that can be a consideration where we then look at a supplement for that specific thing if we can't get it from our diet. But a brain booster pill type thing is generally a scam.
Which we have lots of podcast episodes on that, on how to weed through all of that. Mike, with brain fog, is there a myth that you think as a listener we should bust? Do you have an opportunity to bust a myth? Which one would it be?
Well, I mean, honestly, there's so many. It's hard to choose just one. But I think a common one that kind of never dies, it's evergreen, so to speak, is that the sugar is the only cause of brain fog. Like we kind of talked about earlier, avoiding that blood sugar roller coaster, getting quick sugar spikes and then crashes is certainly one cause. But Matthew and yourself, we've kind of already covered lots of the other ones, right? Sleep, getting good quality sleep is part of it. Eating a balanced diet, a whole food diet, lots of fiber. Protein helps blunt those blood sugar spikes as well. Sugar is certainly not the only cause of brain fog. I mean, we could go on and on about this for sure. Different medications, different treatments, like I said about chemotherapy, lots of different nutrient deficiencies, not just sugar. So, while sugar has always been vilified or villainized, rather, it's certainly not the only villain or not the only culprit in the cause of brain fog for sure. And Matthew, you brought up a good point talking about, the focus force supplement or whatever. A lot of times, people will try and create this fear around this thing, and then but they have the solution. How lucky for us when they want to push these solutions on us to get focus force. Just get your first batch free, or get whatever it is, get 90-day supply for 50% off from such and such influencer and stuff. And really, it's just um, a lot of these people like to create the fear, and then they have a solution. It's supposed to be very convenient for you, but it's also convenient for them because it can help line their pocketbooks. These things we talked about here today, it's not going to line the pocketbooks of any influencer. We're not selling you any kind of focus force or any other cognition booster other than just whole nutrition, whole food nutrition, healthy habits, taking care of these things. The foundations will really, help you combat brain fog, and just help us all age better and gracefully, and perform at our best. And supplements, it's right in the word. It's supposed to supplement our diet, right? It's not supposed to take over our diet. So if you are looking for targeted ways to supplement and help out, try and make sure that you're hitting those foundations first, like good quality sleep, good quality food, lots of green vegetables, lots of fruits and vegetables, high in antioxidants, anti-inflammatory compounds, just super helpful all around for those things. Not
Yeah, with supplements, we want to ensure that we first assess our diet, either ourselves or with a professional. Am I missing something or deficient in something? Next step is there a way that I can get this from foods? And then if not, looking for a way to supplement that specific thing. Generally, again, if it's a specific deficiency that we're looking at, we're going to want to get to that particular thing, not a very generalized or vague type of supplement, or in this case, like brain booster type of thing.
Matthew, I think we have one more myth to dispel. Yeah, why don't you go at that one?
Yes, one more that I wanted to add is the specific inclusion or exclusion of particular foods For again, this is often parroted in other areas, but in this context for boosting brain health. So some people or products or sites will talk about how, for example, let's say gluten is the cause of your brain fog issues, or let's say milk, or just some kind of thing. And there are certainly scenarios where some people shouldn't be having certain foods, maybe for a particular medical condition or specific medical problem someone has. You may want to take that out of their diet, but we can't say at a broad population level that no one should eat this one thing unless it's like actual poison. If it's an actual food, then there's generally some people where maybe they shouldn't, some people maybe where they should. Things like specific eating patterns, where someone might say you need to eat like this many meals in a day, or you need to have more of this nutrient. We need to like cut out all the carbs, things like that. Those are other areas where sometimes these things are overly broadly applied. For something like that, we want to consider, like, let's say we want to evaluate something like our carbs. We want to look at not just quantity but quality overall and how that fits in our diet. And then is there a specific health issue that we have where maybe we would want to exclude something a little more or include something a little more, not just broadly saying that everyone needs to cut this out and will have this exact same benefit if they add or take out this one specific food.
Awesome. And what if my people wanted to learn more about brain health or brain fog? Like what could we offer to our listeners?
Well, Andrea, given that we're not selling anything here, I do appreciate you giving me the chance to plug my areas of interest here with Revive. So that's certainly something that I'm definitely interested in is brain fog, cognitive health, cognitive performance, concussion management, recovery. And so we're going to be having some things coming up on the blog here soon, kind of discussing more about brain fog and brain health and healthy nutrition aging. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And if some of the things are ready by the time this episode airs, Matthew will probably even have some of this links included in the show notes. So make sure you have a look in there and expand on your knowledge about brain fog and overall brain health.
That is a very good wrap up. And I think those are very awesome points to um, finish. So hopefully, I feel like today we have covered a lot of things that can help with brain fog, which really don't seem that I don't want to say not hard because lifestyle change can be hard, but they're not that out of our reach. They are a lot of this stuff is in control that we can try today or experiment with. And Mike, I appreciate it. Yeah, we're not selling you on anything or buy this or anything. These are concepts that if you're listening, that yeah, we think that can have a huge impact on brain fog and brain health. And I think there's lots of awesome pieces in here to consider for sure. So of course, as we wrap up, thanks for listening today. Thanks for joining us today. And we love to hear from our listeners on, yeah, what did you think about this? Do you know somebody who might be experiencing brain fog that maybe would love to listen to this to learn a little bit? Or if you have something that you're like, hey, can we expand on this more? Or I'd like to learn more about this, leave comments below on any of our streaming things. I can't think of the word. Clearly, I have brain fog right now, or something's going on. Platforms, thank you. On any of our streaming platforms, we want to hear from you and hear what you're thinking about or what kind of topic you would want us to cover next. So, as always, it has been a pleasure to do this. And thanks for taking on this awesome conversation around brain fog.